Um, my book, Talking Flags, which I'm going to talk about, will be available to the public on the 21st of June, which is the Signal Corps' birthday. However, today I'm going to give you a secret way to begin reading it today. So hang around for that. Okay. I'd also like to sort of leave you today with what the very rich history of the Signal Corps is. And it goes beyond the military significance of the Corps. It's the technology, it's the history of the Signal Corps. It filters into every element of society. I will tell you a little bit about my military history in a few minutes, but I think it was a major milestone in my personal life, the time I spent in the Signal Corps, both professionally and personally as well. So anyway, I hope this presentation today gives you a better understanding of what the Signal Corps really is, and that it piques your interest in reading my book, and that you do that. And if you do, and you enjoy that book, I really only have two asks. The first ask is that you go to my website and enter your comments about my book through my comments section. I really need your feedback, the good, the bad, the ugly. The ugly is very, very appreciated, whether you like it or not. No, it is. It makes me a better writer. It also tells me if I'm telling the story correctly. And there are some people in the Signal Corps that will read it and say, oh, no, I don't agree with that. I want to hear that. And there may be some elements of the book. My books are not static. I can update my books at any time, and the next time you open it, you'll see whatever revisions I made, and I'll talk about that a little bit. So they're living, breathing documents in many ways. So anyway, I wanted to thank you for your time today. I hope it piques your interest in visiting my website and browsing my previous ebooks, which I'll talk about a little bit. And feel free to ask questions during the presentation, and I'll be happy to try and attempt to answer them. So that's my intro. We'll see if that pretty well tells you a couple things about me. That's my website, donaldscanga.com. I also have business cards here that have my contact information minus my phone number, my email address, my website. In the back, I advertise the Veterans Museum. Every time I hand these out, I talk to them. And normally they're vets that I talk to about them. And so it's kind of a two-way street there. This museum, well, we'll go into that in a second. Okay, so there's a few celebrations today. One was yesterday was the Army's 249th birthday. It started June 14th of 1775 when Continental Congress authorized a few riflemen to go out there and fight the British. In 1798, Congress created a provisional army of 10,000 men and expanded that to 30,000 later. Today, the Army consists with over 450,000 active duty troops and an additional 320,000 active National Guard troops. 14th was also not only the birthday of the Army, but it's also Flag Day. Flag Day is sort of a holiday that's gone by the wayside, I think, in many ways, but gives you a little brief background on what the Flag Day is all about. But one of the things I highlighted was, history as a prologue. So in 1916, President Wilson issued a proclamation stating that the 14th would be National Flag Day. But it was not until 1949 that Congress made that official. So they still don't act very quickly today. And when I read that, I said, I got to highlight that. Okay. It's also Father's Day. So I want to wish all the fathers out there a pre-happy Father's Day. It's on the 19th. It came about relatively late. In '66, President Johnson signed the proclamation declaring the third Sunday of June to be Father's Day. In 1972, Nixon established a permanent observation of Father's Day. And this year it's going to be the 16th. So happy Father's Day. Okay, I spent 5 years in the Army. I attended basic and AIT at Fort Bliss, Texas during July and August. Yeah. Anyone that knows anything about Fort Bliss, El Paso, you know, a 15-mile bivouac march up to McGregor Range is not a very fun thing. Then I served a year in Key West, Florida, which was a great present for going through basic and AIT. I served in the Air Defense Artillery for a year, Hawk missiles in Key West, which was the subject of my first book that I'll talk about later. Then I, based on both a warrant officer and an officer, they said, Don, you're too, I spent a lot of time with electronics in high school, so I was really a geek. And they said, no, you got to be more than a missile man. So they went through every MOS book, and back then they were 3-inch binders about that thick. There was 3 or 4 of them. They went through every MOS book and marked ones they thought I'd be interested in. And I selected one. It was a 1-year course at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, under the Signal Corps to repair IBM and NCR computers. I'll talk about that. That's the key to my book as well, too. That launched a 50-year IT career after I got out and went to college. Served 3 years in Germany as a specialist 5th class. I had a VW Beetle. I drove around repairing computers. I did not have a bad assignment at all. Like I said, I launched a 50-year IT-related career. I retired January of 22. My wife is a financial advisor, and she said, Don, she said, you don't retire from something, you have to retire to something. So figure out what your passions are and pursue them. Thank you, Kim. And so I kind of figured for multiple things. Okay, so I kind of looked at them, and, you know, besides the normal faith, family, you know, country, all that stuff, it really ended up being history and golf. So I thought, okay, what am I going to do about golf? I joined a senior men's league, and I pretend like I play golf. History, though, what am I going to do about history? I decided, well, let me do some research. And I discovered this thing called a digital historian. And it seemed to be a combination of everything that the skills I could bring to bear. I found in business, I was a senior manager with Price Waterhouse. We wrote a lot of documents. We wrote a lot. And I had some partners that were just critical of my writing, and they constantly refined it, refined it, refined it. So I was a pretty good writer. And I love history. And more importantly, I love military history. And I love the men and women that served in the military. So, which is what brought me to the museum. I'm also a volunteer at the museum, and it's a great place for vets to be associated with. If you're a vet and you don't belong, you should belong. I'm a lifetime member of the museum. I volunteer. I'm a grunt, and I do whatever Mike tells me to do. Okay. But what's a digital historian? This is sort of a formal description. But really what it is, it's a new way of presenting historical arguments to a population that is not necessarily geared to reading books and buying books. Two is, it's a way to digitize the past. The type of publications I write, I can include videos and text and audio recording. My book is really a multimedia tool, and it's free, because I wanted to remove any barrier to anyone ever reading my book, which we know the first thing they come to mind is how much they cost. So my product is an ebook. It's typically shorter in length, like I said before, because you can drill down for more information. Rather than an author rewriting what someone else said, and you know, if there's something that's much better to go back to the source, I include it as a link in my book, and right then and there you can drill down further. It includes words, pictures, videos, voice recording, links. It's readable on any internet-connected device. That's the only downside. You have to be connected to the internet to read my book. And that includes phones, tablets, computers. Computers have a bigger screen typically if you have eyesight problems, but the fonts are adjustable by your fingers on your phone or your tablets. On your computer, you can use your mouse to increase the font sizes. So they can be adjusted to whatever your preference is. Nothing's downloaded. My ebooks are really mini websites that are formatted to look and feel like a book. That's really all they are, is a website. Like I said before, well, okay, responsive to the reader, font and page sizes can be adjusted to your preference, and they can be printed, but obviously you're going to lose the links and all that stuff. But you can read the paper. And there's a quick tip section on my website to tell you how to print it. And my ebooks don't collect dust sitting on the shelf. They don't require killing trees to exist. They just sit there quietly as bits and bytes, and they only become a book when you open them. However, they're not necessarily static, as I said before. Any changes or updates I make to my books are immediately available next time you open them. I've published 3 books. My first one, military history book, was If It Flies, It Dies. And it's sort of my books are kind of a combination of history and memoirs. It depends on how you want to look at them. But it reflects my time in the Air Defense Artillery in Key West and where that branch of the Army has been and where it's going. We'll talk about the next book I want to write, but we'll get to that a little bit later. And I published that in September of 22, and I have almost 1,100 readers. Then I started writing this book at the bottom, Puzzle of Human Existence. And Mike said, no, why don't you write a book on how you do what you do? So I stopped in the middle of the bottom one, and I went back, and I said, okay, this is my how-to book. How do I do what I do, and what tools do you need to do that? Now that book, it's available. We may, for those people, and by the way, it works for any genre. It says create in digital history, but it's how to create and self-publish any kind of an ebook. Novels, short stories, whatever you want to do.
History would be perfect.
Family history. Any genre you want to write in, it gives you how I do what I do and which tools you may need to do it. Most of them are inherent within like a Windows platform. Some of them, I'm not a Chrome kind of guy, so I really don't know much about Google World. But so it's written somewhat from a Windows perspective. But we might do a special workshop if there's enough interest here. I may put together a training session based on the book.
But particularly focus on how to preserve your family history.
Whatever draws the audience, I think would be a great idea. Yeah, I'm open, because it works for any genre. Novels, whatever.
Now the bottom one, that is completed, right?
The bottom one's completed. I've almost 400 readers of of Create in Digital History. I have almost 1,100 readers that's read If It Flies, It Dies. By the way, the beauty of publishing electronically is the system I use tells me how many readers have read it, how many pages they read, how much time they spend. Hi, you have a question?
Yeah, well, when's your next book?
We'll talk about that later. My grandson, by the way. It will come up. It was my, well, The Puzzle of Human Existence is a thought piece. It's not truth. It may not conform with your thoughts. It's my vision of where I am in life.
It's a philosophy.
It's a philosophy. And, you know, we know what philosophies are, My son, Jason. Anyway, I have 400 readers for that. A couple things over here. The reason I bring up the readers on that is first-year self-published authors, according to the internet, which I take with a grain of salt, typically self-published authors sell about 250 copies of a book or less. The average newly published U.S. book, meaning hardbound, sells about 200 copies per year. And typically less than 1,000 copies are sold over the lifetime, unless you're a guy like Flint Whitlock, who's not in here. Probably has sold more than 1,000 copies. I bought his book, I was in Ville 20 years ago, and I bought Soldiers on Skis. And when I found out Flint worked here, I brought him my book. He said, "My God, this is a hardbound book." He said, "I haven't seen this for 20 years. I said, "Well, thanks, sign it, and thank you very much." Okay. So the books I published, my upcoming books is Talking Flags, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. And again, a reminder, join us today after my presentation for the birthday cake to help us pre-celebrate that birthday on June 21st. My next book that I've actually started the research on pretty deep is 165 Days on Luzon. That's a mock-up of what I think the cover might end up looking like or something like that. That book is kind of a very special book to me. My stepfather served in the 25th Infantry Division during the liberation of Luzon. And he left me a book because I served in the Army instead of, anyway. That was a hand-illustrated book by a man named William D. Jarnett Rutherford, who later became an Episcopalian bishop after he got out of the Army. He narrated the book and he illustrated the book, and it's nothing but illustrations and narrations of the campaign to liberate the Philippines. Now, Luzon was held by the Japanese, and anyone that remembers anything about Japanese maintaining islands is they fought to their deaths. It was a long, bloody campaign. So as a tribute to my stepfather, who was the reason I joined the Army at 17, but as a tribute to him, I want to write a book that's deeper than the narration and goes into the specifics of that campaign, more as a tribute to him, but it will be history-packed. My target date right now is June 14th. It's my first book having to do with infantry, which June 14th happens to be the 250th birthday of the founding of the U.S. Army in 1775. So I try and time my publication dates to some historical significant event. And then I'm working on If It Flies, It Dies, the second edition. And that's more the future of America's air and space defense. However, it's problematic. It's so easy to go back and write books about air defense history of the past, because we don't have it anymore. There's no secrets out there to divulge, okay? When you start looking into the future, the limitations of what material you can find is going to be very limited. Number two is, as I found out in my research of other books, I can't even get on an Army base anymore. I spent 5 years in the Army. I can't even get on the Army base to go to a museum to do research. For the Army or Defense, huh? Who said what? And I missed that.
I said, what did you do?
What did I do? No, it's not just me. My son is retired Army. Can you get on Army? Well, you can because you, okay, we'll talk about that later. But yeah, I can't even get on an Army base. I mean, even with the DD-214 saying, hey, I served, sort of. Anyway, I shouldn't have done that either. But anyway, any veteran here knows I'm a veteran. Okay. So it's going to be a harder book to write, but I'm gonna write it anyway. Okay, so Talking Flags, History of the United States Army Signal Corps. It's going to be available to the general public on the 21st, but it's available to you guys today. All you have to do is go to donscanga.com, my website. Under the ebook section, click on the picture, the cover page for Talking Flags, and you can start reading it. And that's my way of thanking you for attending today, either physically or remotely. So don't click the Read Me book for Talking Flags. You click that for my other books that's been published, but not for Talking Flags. Click on the cover page and you'll start reading it. My only ask is to send me your comments, the good, the bad, the ugly, using my contact form on my website. You can print it. Go to the quick tips section and you can print it if you want to and not read it online. Again, you lose the links and all that stuff, but it doesn't really matter. The narrative of the book does not, the links provide more information, but I provide a lot of information in the narrative that I write. And follow me on Facebook and LinkedIn. Again, I'm Donald Scanga on Facebook and LinkedIn, not Don. Don is my personal page, don't follow that. But follow Facebook and LinkedIn, because I tend to get political sometimes too. Primarily because that's my only way to market, is through social media. I don't make any money. Whatever I spend, I can't spend, whatever I spend on my ebooks, I can't spend on golf. Okay, it's a pretty simple equation, right? So the only way I can really market is through Facebook and LinkedIn. That's how people know who I am and that my books are available. I could have 350 followers or 1,000 followers, and either way, LinkedIn or Facebook will probably send it to 20 or 30 people. So even that is not a one-to-one kind of a hit. But please follow me on that. And please like and share all my emails. And I also write short history, military history blogs on my website. And then I post them on Facebook and LinkedIn too. So you can, so please share anything you get from me to your followers. That's the only way this pyramid might work out. You are my sole marketing strategy as a bottom line. And things like this. But okay, so here's a few things that you may not already know about the Signal Corps. Some of this will be in the book, some of it won't. In fact, most of it won't. Okay, so the United States Army was the first army in the world to establish a Signal Corps. People don't realize that. It was started by a doctor, an Army doctor, Albert Meyer, center in that picture. And he had created this visual communication system of waving flags. It was a semaphore, which we'll talk about a little bit later, simply called wig-wag, because it looked like you were just wagging flags. So the Signal Corps was officially born and adopted on June 21st of 1860, with Meyer being the first and the only signal officer. Okay, well, because wig-wag depended on line of sight, you can only see flags so far in the distance. They started creating signal towers so they could elevate the flag wavers on top of these towers, and people could see them, you know, further away. Flags were about 4 to 6 feet, 4 by 6 feet per side, and they used both binary 2-element and 4-element codes, which we'll talk about a little bit in the next one. And then they created cipher disks that they could encrypt and decrypt the codes. And sometimes in lieu of flags, torches were used instead. This is an idea of what wig-wag semaphore system looked like. It was capable of transmitting numbers and characters. Okay, you could insert space if you think about typing. You got a word, space, another word. And if you were going to transmit numbers or a series of numbers, then you'd say, okay, I'm going to transmit numbers now. And then they go through the thing and transmit numbers, and then they go back. Okay, so that sort of gives you an idea of what all this flag waving was all about. And because it's an ancient system, I'm not going to go into it. The other part element of the Signal Corps was to gather in military intelligence. And the Signal Corps, as you'll find out through my talk today, spurred multiple branches of the military. Military intelligence started in the Signal Corps, and then it morphed into its own branch. We'll talk about airplanes here in a few seconds, but back when it was initially established was during the Civil War. That's when the Myers invented his system and it was adopted by the Army. And during that time frame, i.e. the Civil War, the North hired Ellen Pinkerton, who was a fairly famous detective, to establish the predecessor of the U.S. Secret Service. And ultimately, he kind of only worked for General McClellan. It wasn't as widespread as the South was, which we'll talk about. And he was kind of reputed to not have provided the best information to the North. The Confederates were smart. They used a signal guy. Well, Colonel Norris, who was a South's chief signal officer, remember the North and South split, the Army split, but the fundamentals of each army, you know, was adopted. So he was the South signal chief. They had a much better spy network than we did. They actually created a secret line of spies between Washington and Richmond with Northern sympathizers that were, well, the Southern sympathizers that lived in the North. And I go into a little bit more detail on that in my book. And then from flags, the Army was one of the first to adopt the telegraph system. And the Beardsley telegraph was the first ones invented. And the Army implemented them during the Civil War. They had a very limited range of 5 to 10 miles. They were successful at Fredericksburg when fog and smoke made visual signaling impossible. That was the downside to flags. But they broke down completely at Chancellorsville, and when you look at that campaign, lack of communications was the primary reason why the North lost that campaign. Eventually, they were replaced by much faster instruments by 1863. The Signal Corps was also our first weather bureau. Many people don't know that. This is actually a picture of the Pikes Peak Signal Corps station taken in 1880. Now, I remember going to the top of Pikes Peak and seeing this building. And that would have been, I try to think about it, in the 60s, 1960s. I swear that building still stood. Anyone here recently been to the top of Pikes Peak? Okay. I'm curious to know if that building still stands. But the Signal Corps, huh?
They've redone it.
They what?
They've
The whole peak? I don't know. I mean, that's a very old, that was a 1880s, so if it's still standing, it's just a testament to construction, I guess, and the materials they use. But anyway, so the Weather Service was not actually transferred to the United States Agriculture Department until 1891. So for at least a decade plus, the Signal Corps was the sole national weather service for the United States. Okay. In all my research, multiple men and women over the course of the decades contributed heavily to the Signal Corps' success. One man stands out above all the rest, and I'm not just talking my personal opinion. I think historians will support me on this. Adolphus Greeley did more for the Service Corps, the Signal Corps, than any other single man in history. And let me tell you a little bit about this guy. I spent a lot of time and a lot of money getting some books on this guy. So he became the Army Chief Signal Officer, and he was also an Arctic explorer. Down here at the bottom, when he was a lieutenant, Greeley led the Lady Franklin Bay Arctic expedition, which lasted for almost 4 years. The men on that expedition survived 250 winter days with rations for only 40 days. Only he and 5 others survived that expedition. He's credited for saving the Signal Corps from congressional efforts to do away with it in the early 1800s. And he pushed the Signal Corps into the modern age by advocating wireless technology, airplanes, motorized vehicles, and many, many, many other technical innovations. He's an amazing man. To give you an idea, he joined the Army at the same age as I did, at the same rank as I did, at private at age 17. Then he was promoted up the ranks to captain. Now here's a bridge. In 1887, he was promoted from captain to brigadier general. Somebody saw the brilliance of this guy to promote him up, what, 5 ranks? Anyway, he passed away in 1935. He was awarded the Medal of Honor simply for a lifetime of splendid service. Now, the current standards for a Medal of Honor, we're using the Vietnam standards, and that's what standards we use today. But when you look throughout history, which I did, the one common element of the Medal of Honor is above and beyond. Not what you did, but that your actions were above and beyond the call of duty. So a life of splendid service really means a lot more than what they say, but that's the official words in the certificate. And he's buried in Arlington. Great man, I mean, really. And if you're a Signal Corps veteran, everything we did, he started one way or the other. Okay, so poor graphic, but that sort of gives you, the red are the military telegraph lines mapped as of 1885. I don't have a civilian overlay of that, but they fell much behind the Signal Corps telegraph systems. In 1898, we established the Telegraph and Cipher Center for the White House. So the Signal Corps was the first one to begin to implement communications at the national level for government reasons. It was also known as the Telegraph and Cipher Center. The man over there sitting at the desk, if I can do it, over there is Captain Benjamin Montgomery of the U.S. Signal Corps. That, by the way, allowed us to communicate from Washington to San Francisco for the first time in history. Dirigibles and balloons. So the Signal Corps sort of toyed with dirigibles and balloons, and they made experiments in that regard. And that led to the establishment of what was called the Signal Corps Aeronautic Division on August 1st, 1907. And the transcript charged them with the task of taking charge of all matters pertaining to military ballooning, air machines, and all kindred subjects. And I love the way that's written. So the Signal Corps became the foundation for the Army Air Forces, which eventually became the Air Force. It was due to the Signal Corps. So anyway, they were the first ones to experiment with aircraft. The Signal Corps began testing its first airplane at Fort Myer, Virginia in 1909-08, when on September 9th, Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge, who was flying with Orville Wright, was killed when the plane crashed. He became our first military aviation casualty, Signal Corps. The Signal Corps also became the first combat squadron of the United States. After more testing with the Wright Flyer was done, It was accepted by the Army and identified as Airplane 1, and I believe it's in the Smithsonian. Within a few weeks, or days actually, the first Provisional Aero Squadron was redesignated as the first Aero Squadron and began flying activities a few days later. In 1916, they were assigned a role in the punitive expedition of the Mexican border when Mexico was testing our borders out. And this squadron became the first air combat unit of the Army. Again, Signal Corps. The balloon house. Well, okay, so they experimented with balloons, but balloons were very expensive because of the gas needed to power the balloons. But much more importantly, balloons were pretty easy targets. If you had a rifle, they wouldn't last long in combat.
Don,
Yeah.
stand a little closer to the screen.
Oh, okay.
So we can see you too.
So some of the other things that came out of the Signal Corps. Throughout all my research, the Signal Corps was one of the first military units to enlist and promote women. And they did that more than a token. And I didn't bring up 13 other slides that I could have used to support that statement, but the Signal Corps plainly exceeded every other military element in enlisting, recruiting, and developing women in the military. So that's something to be proud of if you're a Signal Corps guy. First unit was called the Signal Corps Female Telephone Operators Unit. The Army loves those kind of titles. Anyway, over 7,000 women applied, only 223 were accepted. So the criteria for being accepted was fairly small. They served as telephone operators in both England and France during the war. And they had to be bilingual in both languages, obviously, and English, so 3 languages. The Army also established, the Signal Corps also established the Army War Department Message Center in 1923. And it coordinated all radio, telegraph, and cable dispatches across the nation. Okay, 1923. The Signal Corps integrated technology to the point that we really have just replicated what we have there. So by, this is a slide, by 1929, with the adoption of the shortwave transmissions, Washington could communicate immediately with San Francisco via radio instead of telegraph. The SRC-31, some of the developments that came out of the Signal Corps was one of the first tactical radios powered by dry batteries. I'm a geek guy, kind of guy. Radios is how I got into this whole thing back when I was in high school. It's kind of an amazing technology, but it was a hand generator with a portable loop antenna. You can see the loop. And there was a couple limitations. One was it only transmitted for about 5 miles. And it's really only designed for headquarters to headquarters communication. It wasn't designed for the combat people on the field. Oops, sorry. However, that morphed and changed quickly. In 1943, they developed the walkie-talkie. It weighed about 30 pounds. Guy on the telephone, with a backpack. So he was an officer. He was probably a private. Anyway, it was built by Motorola. At the time, it wasn't called Motorola. I'll touch on that in a slide from now. It was a backpack portable FM device, frequency modulation device, had a range of about 2 to 3 miles. And then during World War II, we fielded about 50,000 of them. Handy-talkies. Now, I always called those walkie-talkies. When I was a kid, we played Army, right? Anyway, but they're called handy-talkies. I didn't know that until I did research. The SCR 526. This was different. It became a two-way receiver radio. And first to see widespread use, it was developed by Galvin Manufacturing, who morphed into Motorola as time went on. Weighed about 5 pounds, had a range of about 1 mile. And by war's end, over 130 units were manufactured by Motorola and produced. And this picture happens to be combat action in Okinawa in 1945. Code talkers. So encryption is a key element in military communications. Keeping the other guy from knowing what you're really saying, okay? When, how many guys, where they're going to be, what they're going to do when they get there. So the First World War, the picture is represented on the left. They inducted, enlisted, tagged 19 Kaqcha soldiers, to begin using their native language to confuse the enemy. That was in World War I, where we utilized that. In World War II, we really expanded it. I can't come up with a number of people that we enlisted, but in World War II, they spoke Cherokee, Choctaw, Comanche, and Navajo, just to name a few. And the picture to the right is combat in Australia during World War II. So, you know, the Japanese in World War II could not decode Comanche. This was fairly new to me. Anyone here ever hear of this system? T-Rose? You've heard of it? He's a signal guy. You've heard of it? Okay. The world's first satellite services were developed by the Signal Corps, launched by NASA between 60 and 67, with monitoring stations established at Camp Evans, New Jersey, which is the satellite of Fort Monmouth, basically. Fort Monmouth, where I went to Signal Corps school, Fort Monmouth was an R&D center. I mean, many technologies were developed out of Fort Monmouth over the course of the years. They've closed that now, and they moved it, and I forgot where's Fort Eisenhower?
It used to be called Fort Gordon.
Okay, okay, so now that's where Signal Corps had, yeah, okay. But the signal school I went to was at Fort Monmouth. It was a great place. Well, I talk about that more in the book. So these were launched. The first pictures generated on this device was printed on a facsimile machine, which was created by the Signal Corps R&D lab. I didn't know that the facsimile machines were invented by the Signal Corps. They were. And the pictures were on President Eisenhower's desk shortly thereafter, and he released them to the world. According to my research, I can only state that as of 2009, which is a long time ago, all 10 satellites were still in orbit. I don't think they were functional. I couldn't find that out. Any Vietnam vets here? Guys familiar with the PRC-25? It was a transistorized FM radio used in the Vietnam War primarily. It could operate on 920 channels with a range of 3 to 5 miles. However, the power of this is it could be boosted by aircraft to up to 60 miles. General Creighton Abrams, who was commander of MAC-V, said that it was the single most important tactical item in Vietnam, and that's what I wanted to ask my Vietnam vets, if they ever used the device and if they would agree with General Abrams' statement or not.
I was a helicopter pilot, so I didn't
Use that one?
all the guys in the back of my helicopter.
They all had them. Yeah, the guys you were dumping out, right? Yeah.
The range was more than 3 to 5 miles because we had the same frequencies in the helicopters. Helicopters can emit the same frequencies as the Prick 25. And we could, if we couldn't see anybody on the ground miles away, more than 5 miles, that's how we got.
So were you able to retransmit those signals or boost them?
There was a retrans position, but we never used them.
Gotcha. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, then we morphed from radios to MSC, mobile subscriber equipment. Think of it as a combat mobile phone, I guess. And I'm going to talk about Jason here in a second, but MSC was introduced in the late 1980s at a small cost of about $4 billion. But it replaced all those multi-channel radios and stuff in the previous slides. And it could interoperate with tactical satellites and NATO allies without large antennas. As you can see, the antennas aren't very big. Highly mobile, saw combat action in Desert Shield and Desert Storm. According to what I could find, handled an average of 10 million words a day. MSC morphed. Okay, so what's the future of the Signal Corps? The next phase was something called the Warfighter Information Network. Now, this is where historical research and modern military intelligence kind of conflicts, right? Because the newer the technology, the less information is available for security reasons. Anyway, so the Warfighter Information Tactical Network, the Army loves acronyms. Okay, like I was in IT, we loved acronyms. So they call it WIN-T. Ended the mobile subscriber equipment era. It relies on Internet Protocol technology, IP technology, up to 3 and 4G wireless technologies to enable on-the-move, high-speed, high-capacity backbone communications, linking warfighters and tactical combat units with their command structures across the globe. That was the concept behind WIN-T. And it basically consisted of a WIN-T truck on the left, WIN-T satellite terminal on the right, and then WIN-T on the move. That was the system, those 3 vehicles there. However, like most good things in the Army, that morphs too. So WIN-T had 3 increments, 1, 2, and 3. I'm a project manager, an IT project manager by trade. Think of increments as phases. So you had a project with phase 1, 2, and 3. Increments 1, 2, and 3 are synonymous with that. We got through 2 of those increments. We never really rolled it out completely across the Army base. We'll get back to that in a second. And what I can find out is today the Army's building a new communication system. Now, the Army Futures Command is the command structure within the Army that plays with the new stuff is a good way to say it. They're the Futures Command. They're the ones that say, okay, this is where we are today, folks. This is where we have to be in the future. So this network is primarily still under the Army's Future Command, meaning it hasn't been rolled out to the troops based on the information I can get. But the focus is on command and control, and the acronym for that, like the Army always does, is C2. So when I refer to C2, the best statement I could find that I could present to you comes from a General James Rainey. And he said, I'm not sure there'll be a command post at the battalion level and below in the future. Now, any ex-military people here, I want you to digest that for a second. Envision smaller, redundant command posts with C2 on the moon without having to stop. That will be the future of combat. Fast.
What does that mean? I guess I'm having trouble.
Okay. This is how I interpreted based on maybe information I didn't provide. The structure of Army commands, from division, all the way down to company and platoon levels, is that traditional hierarchy. And I envision that future battles are not going to be conducted the way conventional battles were conducted in the future. It's going to move fast, it's going to be slightly disorganized, and they're not going to stop. So they're not going to advance, set up new command posts. you know, and then bring them up and then advance. It's, to me, a continuous movement process. Now-
Basically a distributed network.
Well, the technology behind it would be, yeah. But the technology only mirrors the tactical approach that they're taking. And I think our tactical approaches to warfighting has changed dramatically. And I'm going to get to that in another slide. They've divided it into two phases, C2 fixed and C2 next. C2 fixed is to ensure soldiers can communicate and fight on today's battlefield. Next is going to focus more on advanced technologies, open architecture, scalability, and the ability to evolve and iterate quickly. That means that the technology platform that they use to create this cross-functional system can be highly advanced without replacing everything that's out there. I mean, yeah.
I was just
Oh.
going to add to the comment about what the quote from General Rainey was.
Yeah.
So in that envision, so you got brigade and battalion, and then you got the distributed network aspect. So think of like your cloud-based technology. So it went from radio line of sight to SATCOM, satellites in the sky, the low Earth orbits. So that's a continuous tactical vehicle going down the, from A to Z, not breaking signal. And that's basically what it's doing on the move, C2 strategy, utilizing the mega clouds out there, Amazon has, that's what they're working with 101st. And that's exactly where that quote came from, is 101st to move that C2 side.
And I'm going to actually introduce this guy in a few minutes.
No, it's.
No, I am, okay. In just a few minutes, literally. Okay, so again, our war fighters of the future, or maybe not the not too distant future. So, yes, sir.
Most of us here use Zoom technology, and when you get past the one-on-one communication, how is that working when you have hundreds of people on the same system? How does that communication work?
Hold that question. We're almost ready for that. Okay, so in closing, I hope I piqued your interest in the Signal Corps this morning and left you wanting to be curious to learn more. If so, please read my new ebook. Again, you're my only marketing people. You can begin today by visiting my website, donaldscanga.com. Under the ebook section, click on this cover page, and thank you today for attending. Now I have one quickie. Are there any Signal Corps veterans here? If so, please stand. Okay, my son's the only one that's going to stand. Okay, I'm already standing. Were you Signal? You weren't Signal. Okay, anyway. Okay. So I'd like to introduce you to one veteran, my son, Jason Scanga. That's Jason. Jason served for 23 years in the Army, Colorado Army National Guard. He saw 2 combat deployments. As a young second lieutenant, Jason was a combat signal platoon leader during the Scanga campaign to overthrow Saddam Hussein. As a major, he served as a Battalion S6, which is a signal and communications officer with the Colorado 19th Special Forces Group in Afghanistan during Operation Enduring Freedom. And as a civilian, Jason's focus is providing technology, hardware, software, and support services directly to the United States Army at every level through his current employer. And he might be better able to answer any of the questions about the newest generation of Army communications. So I sort of anticipated that. Go ahead.
So how much AI is being used here?
Good question. So Army Future Command, my dad hit the spot. Like Army Future Command, your taxpayers' money is being well spent. The command's sitting on Austin, Texas, on the University of Austin's campus. They come in civilian uniform. Colonel Eric Vito is basically running kind of that whole command structure that way. So when you start to talk about artificial intelligence, AI, it's a buzzword in the industry, kind of like cloud and all these buzzwords, automation side. So there are a lot of industry, what the Army's done a really good job with is providing the industry to bring them, they provide requirements and the industry provides the solutions for them. So I was actually just 2 weeks ago in Philadelphia at the technical exchange meeting hosted by C3T, which is all those acronyms below it. WIN-T, the Army changes acronyms like crazy
Yeah.
as well, so it's now called Tactical Networks, is a new sub-organization underneath C3T. But going back to AI, what is AI? There's numerous different definitions. I asked my kids what it is, they're gonna show me some cool gadget on their iPhone. What the Army's looking for is security automation with AI is a huge requirement. Being able to turn these systems on, having a zero trust infrastructure is a new buzzword for that, but it's providing security to the edge. I think one of the biggest, and honestly, it's funny because my dad showed that PRIC 25, which is PRC. The Army has really bad acronym names. When the gentleman said PRIC,
Most of us
But,
know that, most of us.
I grew up in the mobile survivor unit and equipment, and have those handheld devices. I've had a couple of them thrown at my head a few times, so I saw that picture and I thought it was funny. The Army moved for that development. A lot of the technology in the past hasn't changed. We moved from line of sight, we're still line of sight, out in the tactical world. We moved to SATCOM, so like a lot of the radio functions of PRC moved to PSC, PIS-5s, or whatever they're called. Those are SATCOMs. So if you ever watched,
Acronyms are acronyms, right?
that Navy SEAL movie where the guy's like on a ridge and he's getting shot at and putting that antenna up on the ridge to hit that satellite so he can call in support. That's hitting that SATCOM link, right? So that's where the Army's moved to. Now, the biggest challenge in the Army, and this is what I live daily, is data. There's so much data, right? And how does the Army transform to that data? So there's data from the soldier, there's data from the brigades going up to where do we store this at? Do we put them on Amazon? Do we put it in Google? That's the challenge today. And so they have, going back to, I can't remember this gentleman's question about, what was
How to communicate, if you think of typical military models, it's one direction.
Yes. So you got
Yeah,
full
two
duplex, half duplex kind of mythology in your head. So think of it as like that data perception, right? So how do I get the data down to the, down range? And how do I collect that data and then break the talk or break where I'm at in the ground and move? Today, they have to shut down the network and then move. And that quote is, I want to be able to move this talk to this location at a rapid pace. So they're talking about using cloud technology to do that signal. So it's constantly hitting. The issue is bandwidth, right? SATCOM links only give up to 100 gigabytes per second. You guys sit at home at 1 gig, so think of it 1 meg versus 100 megs versus 100 gigabytes. It's night and day. So that's the issue. I love this stuff. Like, I'm passionate about it. I mean, I probably took out from my dad a lot in the history side of it, but today's Army is robust, right? We're working with other, JADC2, which is a joint effort to get a unified network for all the, Marine Corps, the Air Force side of the house, the Navy. So all these complex networking is trying to go to this one unified network. Now, in my lifetime, it's probably never gonna happen. Maybe my boys might see it, but the Army moves, I think MSC was around.
Yeah,
Vietnam
oh, yeah,
to
yeah.
2000
PRCs were
something.
around forever. I
Yeah,
mean,
so it's just, your taxpayer money is getting spent really well. I promise you that, guys. It's millions of dollars. Yes, ma'am?
So I think you mostly answered this, but I was gonna ask if the Army leads the other branches and what's going on here, or
I mean, I'm an Army guy, so we're always ahead of them, but no, to be honest with you, Space Force is realistically where we're moving a lot of the complications. You can't really talk about it in this room, but what Space Force mission is basically what's around Earth, okay? And that data that's collecting in the signal side of the house. So the government's put a lot of money into Space Force, which is home down here in Colorado Springs now. So I believe but as far as like Army side tactical, Army's big on tactical.
mhm.
Air Force is big on air power.
Strategic.
Strategic side, so.
But you kind of wonder, between Space Force and the Army and the services, where the cutoff is. Because I can see they can say, well, you're diddling in our area.
Yeah.
And you say, my needs are here, and they're saying, no, that's not what you're
Think
gonna
of
get.
C2, like C2 is exactly what that is, command and control, right? So as a ground forces commander, you're in charge of the overall ground mission. So you got air power units on ground, and that's that unified network is what the military is moving towards. And General Rainey, I've met him a few times, but General Ray is the new Army Forces Network CFT guy. There's 40 different acronyms your way, but he's in charge of that mission, and then millions of dollars are being pumped into this unified network, which I'm part of on the industry side, trying to help them.
What do you see, you're obviously watching what's going on in the Ukraine,
Ukraine,
and the communication issues and the satellite positioning, all of that
it's amazing.
falls.
Well, think of, there's a little gentleman named Elon Musk. He gave the ground units in Poland all the Starlink for free. So there are all the mesh networking that's going on right now in Ukraine and Poland. I mean, honestly, we're not in Ukraine, but we're in Poland right now. So Fourth ID, I think just ripped out there, but that's what they're using for the mesh networking is the Starlink data. I mean, that's pretty sick. Like, I mean, they're using satellites state of the art that's getting, shot up into space every month. And that's where Space Force comes in too, so.
So for young people, it would seem to me that's a great area to
Ethan, what do you want to
look
do when you
for
grow
a
up?
career.
That's the toughest answer of the whole, yeah. He's into cybersecurity right now, and I think that's where it's at too, so.
Well, data analysis too.
Yes, yeah, 100%. Yeah, the whole military intelligence side is, data analytics.
This gentleman had
Oh, I was just gonna comment that in the Army, you learn the acronym before you learn what it is.
What it is, yeah. And even after knowing that, it's
And with
not-
survival radios, we had in aviation, it was all the acronym,
Yeah.
followed by the number.
Mhm.
That's true. It's-
So, I got thinking is if we're now so dependent on the internet for communications, wouldn't somebody eventually attack the satellites that are
Absolutely.
around the earth? And that would be the way to win?
One of the missions of the Space Force is to prevent that from happening.
I mean, they have, our adversaries are having the same technologies as well. I mean, what do you think's getting, just because it's a commercial, rocket going to space hosting a China satellite, which is called a weather satellite, right? Or the satellite balloon that we spent $100 million shooting it down with F-22, like, what do you think that balloon was doing? It wasn't collecting weather data,
Yeah.
I promise you that. It
So
was over a
that's
missile silo.
Not to be funny or anything,
No.
but does that mean we're ready for World War III?
Man, you gotta ask your president.
You're-
man.
you're
I have no
never
idea.
ready.
We're
No,
trying
no.
to be. I don't wanna go to World War III. I know that.
I don't think any of us do, but
We are one of the best forces in the world. I still believe that.
No, there was another question.
John, I didn't quite understand if there will be hardback copies of the.
Oh, no, well, no, I don't produce because I'm producing for free, so I'm not going to pay the printing cost. But you can go to my website and under the quick tips section, when you open the quick tip section, it will actually show you how to print it. So you open my book, and not to get into the technology, but behind the flip book that you read online, there's a PDF that was used to generate that. So you're printing the PDF. The good thing about that is the font's bigger, but it's static. It's printed. But yeah, the quick tips, you can print any of my books. Your paper, your ink, and I can continue to offer them for free. Yes, sir.
Maybe I missed it, but I didn't hear you address the ARPANET.
I'm sorry?
I didn't hear you address the ARPANET.
The ArthurNet. ARPANET. That never came up in my research because if you look, I sort of came up to today in the book, and obviously the future stuff I touched on in WinT and and the CFT next steps. But ArborNet, are you familiar?
Excuse me, ARPANET was started by the Army and then evolved into the DARPANET, which was defense,
Yeah.
which is the internet that we have today.
Oh, yeah, I didn't get into that at all. That was probably not even the Signal Corps' domain, was it?
Yeah, so I mean, that was an internal net, right? So it was a classified net.
Initially, it was internal Army.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and then they moved it, and then now it's actually called DODIN.
Who?
It's the DODIN network. I know, they call it, but you're absolutely correct. But the theory is the same, sir. So intranet, but here's the truth, is there's like 12 different classification of networks inside the DoD now, right? So, and then we have coalition networks. I mean, the confusion complexity around the entire C2 battlefield is insane. And that's where they're talking about this, it's called UNO, Unified Network Operations, which is that unified
it was a
network
new project.
I mentioned. Yeah, so this whole program is being developed to be able to move to that one C, and that's what it's called C2 Next. But I'll tell you this, like, it's gonna take a long time to get there, It will, but it will get there.
There's so many stakeholders in this process, and people that serve know that you don't want to give up what you have. And what you have is better than anyone else's to begin with. So it's as you read history, it's an evolutionary process. Technology is an evolutionary process. I mean, I started in 1969, 70. And, I mean, what I can do on my cell phone today. My last chapter of my book, I talk about the computer I repaired had 5,000 bytes of memory, 500K. This has millions of gigabytes. I mean, it's just, technology is going to continue to evolve and expand, and whatever we do historically is going to be a snapshot in time, and by the time I'm done talking, it's changed. But thank God it is, yeah.
Can I back up a few decades?
You can.
Early on, you had a slide here with the wigwag signals.
Yeah.
In 1957, when I went to boot camp in Cambridge, Maryland, the Navy used the wigwag signals as part of our PT exercises on a daily basis.
They did. Well, and some of in the 50s and maybe even in the early 60s, I think ships still used wigwag for inter-ship communications. And it was secure. I mean, unless somebody could visually watch you, the communications could not be, interpreted by anyone else. So, yeah, I think it's fascinating. The troubles with writing history is I can go down so many rabbit holes. As I'm researching this, and then I read this, and I need to find out more about that. And I end up writing 3 lines of, text. But I spend hours going down rabbit holes. Any other questions?
One thing I'd just point out, in terms of survivability attacking our satellite systems, back in the 80s, I was assigned to the Defense Nuclear Agency, and our task was to build large pulse X-ray machines to test full-scale satellite systems, or at least the components. Because as all the technology became more advanced and our chips became even more miniaturized, if they were hit by a pulse of intense X-rays from a distant nuclear burst, it would create havoc in our systems. And we were just finding every time they seem to advance our technology, when you test the box with a large pulse X-ray machine, or even an underground nuclear test for that, there'd be failure modes no one ever visualized. So, you just don't know keeping up with the technologies.
Yeah, it is. It's a never-ending process.
What we should do is get that one slide you had, which had all your contact information and your books, and we should have that posted and could share it with everyone.
Right there.
Now, where was the one which had your different books? Because I thought that also told you how you connected.
Okay, that's the current ones. No, it doesn't
No,
show
no,
how to
whatever.
connect. Just go, okay.
Go to your website.
More importantly, I have business cards up here.
Oh, there we go.
And it has my website and all that stuff on there. On the back of it, I always advertise the museum. I tell you what, when I was thinking about what do I do with history, I forgot to mention that I have a good friend that goes back 20 years in IT with me, and his name is David Dean Barrett. And Dave Barrett introduced me to the Veterans Museum. He's an author. He was an ex-IT guy like me, and he started writing military history books, and he has published real books. And he said, oh, by the way, I volunteer occasionally or show up at the museum. I've never seen him volunteer here. And so I came up and I met Mike, and
The rest is history.
and it's not just history, it's the guys and the women here that were veterans, and how much I missed being connected with them. And I don't want to get emotional right now, but the Veterans Museum has been the best thing that's happened to me, and I'm proud to be a member, a lifetime member, and I'm proud to help Mike and the crew out doing whatever they have me do when I come here. But so come back again, and Ron, I know you already have them.